Did you get your parents to record this show on VHS so you could watch it over and over again?
Laser. Goodbye, Michael Knight.
On April 4th, 1986, roughly 20 million people watched Knight Rider and had absolutely no idea it was the last episode. No finale, no farewell, no closure. The real reason NBC pulled the plug has almost nothing to do with ratings. So how did a talking car become one of the biggest icons in television history? But first, let's take a look at just how massive this thing really was.
Michael, don't forget, I have no molecular bonded shell.
No, but we learned a few things since our last encounter. All right, let's not use super pursuit mode unless we have to.
In 1981, producer Glenn A. Larson, the same man behind Battlestar Galactica and The Fall Guy, was looking for his next big swing, and NBC was desperate. The network was struggling in the ratings, and executives were willing to gamble on something unusual if it meant grabbing attention. Larson pitched a concept that sounded borderline insane on paper: a modern knight, a man with a new identity, and a car with a mind of its own. The hero would start as Michael Long, a cop shot in the face and left for dead, rescued by a dying billionaire, given a new face, a new name, and a mission. His partner would be KITT, the Knight Industries 2000, a Pontiac Trans Am with artificial intelligence and a dry sense of humor. NBC wasn't convinced a talking car would work, but they were out of options, so it was greenlit anyway.
Got a sharp curve 1,000 meters ahead.
Okay, pal, it's time to give him a taste of his own medicine. All right, I need everything you can give me.
Knight Rider premiered on September 26, 1982, going head-to-head against Dallas, at the time one of the most watched shows on American television. It should have been crushed. Instead, it survived. Then it grew. Word spread fast, and by mid-season, it was clear something unusual was happening. Kids were making the scanner sound on playgrounds. Pontiac dealerships were fielding calls about black Trans Ams. William Daniels, the voice of KITT, was getting recognized at events despite nobody ever seeing his face on screen. What made it work wasn't just the concept. The stunts were real, the jumps were real, and the explosions were real. No CGI, no digital safety nets, just practical stunt work that gave the show a cinematic edge that most TV couldn't touch. The production built multiple versions of KITT simultaneously: hero cars for close-ups, stunt cars for jumps, and wreck cars for crashes. Each conversion cost thousands of dollars. Each destroyed car had to be replaced. The show felt like a movie every week, and audiences could feel the craftsmanship behind it. By the end of Season 1, Knight Rider wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. But the real explosion was still to come, and it started thousands of miles away from NBC's offices.
Fire your rocket booster.
By 1984, the show was operating at full power. Hasselhoff was becoming an international star, particularly in Germany, where Knight Rider had developed a following that bordered on obsession. Merchandise was everywhere. The Trans Am became the dream car of the decade, and the show kept raising the stakes. Season 2 introduced Car, KITT's unstable prototype, and Garth Knight, Michael's twisted physical double. These weren't throwaway villains. They expanded the mythology of the show and gave it a depth that kept older viewers engaged, while the action kept younger ones hooked. The writing team understood that the relationship between Michael and KITT was the emotional engine of the series, and they leaned into it hard. KITT wasn't just a gadget, he was a character who was loyal, witty, occasionally sarcastic, and that dynamic gave the spectacle genuine heart. Universal saw Knight Rider as a crown jewel. NBC relied on it as a dependable performer. The cast felt the momentum. The crew worked brutal hours to keep up with the production demands. Every episode felt bigger than the last, and that was the problem. Bigger episodes meant bigger checks, and the accountants were about to slam the brakes. But here's what nobody in the audience could see. At the exact moment fans were buying KITT model kits and hanging posters on their walls, NBC executives were already having a very different conversation behind closed doors. Because the numbers that mattered most to the network weren't the ratings, they were the production costs. And those costs were becoming impossible to justify.
Get a turbo boost.
No, Michael. There's a school bus trapped behind the truck.
Knight Rider was one of the most expensive action shows on American television in the early 1980s. The stunt work alone was staggering. Every time KITT launched off a ramp, there was a real car in the air, and more often than not, a real car being written off afterward. The production team maintained a rotating fleet of Trans Ams at significant ongoing expense, and the pressure to deliver bigger sequences every week never let up.
What's terrific?
This is the perfect opportunity to field test Sid.
Sid.
Satellite infiltration drone. The only one of its kind.
Looks like a high-tech hat box.
Behind the scenes, the strain was showing in other ways too. Patricia McPherson, who played Bonnie, KITT's primary technician, was quietly dropped after Season 1 and replaced with a new character. She was brought back in Season 3, but that disruption signaled something. The show was already making compromises it didn't want to make. As costs mounted, NBC and Universal began pushing back. Writers were told to reduce expensive stunt sequences. Producers were instructed to reuse footage. Stock shots of KITT jumping or turbo boosting started appearing with increasing frequency, and fans noticed. The magic of the early seasons came from the feeling that anything could happen. Once the repetition set in, that feeling started to erode. The response was to throw new elements at the problem. Season 4 introduced Super Pursuit Mode, a redesigned KITT with a more aggressive look and expanded capabilities. On paper, it was a bold, creative swing. In practice, it felt like a show straining to convince its audience it still had something new to offer. Instead of feeling like an evolution, it felt like a distraction. The show was still fun. It was still ambitious in places. But the gap between what it had been and what it was becoming was getting harder to ignore, and the network had already made its decision. They just hadn't told anyone yet.
You're going to crash,
I can handle it, kid.
but you're approaching a dangerous curve. Your chance of survival is less than 0.04%.
Will you stop with the odds?
Glenn A. Larson, the creative architect of the series, had moved on to other projects. New showrunners stepped in, but the vision that had defined the early seasons didn't transfer cleanly. The tone became inconsistent. Some episodes leaned into broad comedy, others tried to recapture the gritty edge of Season 1, and the balance that had made the show work simply wasn't there anymore.
I didn't want to do another Knight Rider. Knight Rider was and is a legendary show, but at that point Knight Rider was looked at as fluff.
Hasselhoff grew increasingly frustrated. He had watched the show evolve from a character-driven action series into something that felt, at times, like a vehicle showcase with a human co-star. He wanted more focus on Michael Knight as a person, more emotional depth, more dramatic weight. The network wanted spectacle. The two things were pulling in opposite directions, and nobody was winning. Meanwhile, Universal was doing the math. By the time a show hits 88 to 90 episodes, it crosses the syndication threshold, the point where the real long-term money is made. Knight Rider was approaching that number, and once you're there, the calculus changes completely. Continuing an expensive show with softening ratings stops making financial sense when the syndication deal is already locked in. The moment the show was truly finished came not with a dramatic announcement, but with a quiet internal shift when the decision was made to stop investing in the show's future and simply let it run out the clock. No new directions, no creative reinvention, just enough episodes to get to the finish line.
Where to, Michael?
121 Wall Street.
We lost contact. Did something go wrong with the comlink? I still read 3 activated clips, Michael. Michael, didn't you hear me? What's the matter? Why won't you answer me? Michael? You become one of them.
On April 4th, 1986, Knight Rider aired an episode called Voodoo Night. It was a standard episode. Nothing about it suggested finality. No emotional callbacks, no farewell moments, no sense that this was the last time audiences would see Michael Knight and KITT together. The credits rolled, and that was it. The show was over. Hasselhoff had pushed for a proper finale. The episode The Scent of Roses, in which Michael considers leaving Flag to settle down, is often cited by fans as the closest thing the show ever got to an emotional send-off, but it aired earlier in the season and was never intended as a finale. When the actual cancellation came, there was no time, no budget, and apparently no appetite to give the show the ending it deserved. 20 million viewers, 4 seasons, 90 episodes, and it ended like someone had simply switched off the lights and walked out of the room. Knight Rider didn't disappear after cancellation. It multiplied.
David, I'm sorry I called you back for this, old friend.
Well, KITT's been a long time, old buddy. You know these guys?
No, David, but I don't think they've come to wash my windscreen.
The show continued airing in more than 70 countries. Hasselhoff went on to Baywatch, but never distanced himself from Michael Knight, understanding better than most that some roles define a career rather than limit it. KITT became one of the most replicated vehicles in television history, with fan-built replicas appearing at car shows and conventions for decades. The Trans Am that NBC accountants had deemed too expensive to keep on screen became immortal the moment it left it. Hollywood kept trying to recapture it. Knight Rider 2000 in 1991. Team Knight Rider in 1997, a full reboot in 2008. None of them landed. Not because the concept was wrong, but because the original had something that can't be manufactured on demand. It arrived at exactly the right cultural moment, when technology felt like a promise rather than a given, and when the idea of a car that could think, talk, and protect you felt genuinely miraculous. We carry more computing power in our pockets today than KITT ever had. But that's exactly why the original still resonates. It wasn't about the technology, it was about the relationship. A man and a machine that trusted each other completely, in a world that didn't always deserve that kind of optimism. The last time anyone saw KITT on that original show, he was simply driving away. No farewell speech, no final jump, just the road and then silence. Maybe that's the most honest Knight Rider ending possible, because Michael Knight never looked back, and neither did the show. It just kept driving, and for the generation that grew up watching it, somewhere in the back of their mind, it never really hit the brakes.